They were just heading to another quiet rest stop along Interstate 40 when, all of a sudden, the Steel Vipers motorcycle gang rolled into Crosswind Junction. All they saw was an aging Marine veteran sitting alone at the counter, a few scattered truckers minding their own business, and a potential new addition to their empire. Criminal empire. What they didn't realize was that James Connor wasn't just any former Marine. He was a very special man. He was Force Recon, with loads of experience in counter-narcotics operations. His calm, collected exterior hid a brilliant strategic mind that had dismantled drug cartels across 3 continents by the time the dust settled. The Steel Vipers were about to learn a very valuable lesson about judging a book by its cover. Their harmless act of intimidation would lead to the takedown of a $700 million criminal empire that spanned 5 states. This is the story of how 2 bikers picked the wrong veteran to intimidate, and how one man's courage inspired an entire community to stand up for themselves. It's a story that shows how we can all stand up for each other when we're faced with a challenge. Let's take back our roads before we continue with the story, shall we? If you like this story, we'd love it if you'd hit that subscribe button. We've got something really special lined up for you tomorrow. The lovely evening sun cast long, warm shadows across Crosswind Junction rest stop. As the sun started to set, the lovely little neon sign came to life. James Connor was sitting at his usual spot at the counter, methodically reviewing route maps while sipping his 3rd cup of coffee. He was lost in thought, but he was also happy. After 20 years of military service, he got into the habit of positioning himself where he could see both entrances while keeping his back to the wall. Sarah Martinez approached with a fresh pot of coffee in hand, ready to share it with anyone who needed a lift. With a pot of coffee in hand, she was a constant source of warmth in the diner, her cheerful demeanor lighting up the place with a warm, welcoming glow. With a smile, she moved between the customers asking, "Need a refill, James?" as she tilted the pot towards his cup. "Thanks so much, Sarah. It always tastes better when you make it," she said with a warm smile, filling it to the brim. "You always say that about his cup, and I totally believe you." The peaceful evening routine was suddenly disrupted by the arrival of 2 motorcycles, which roared into the parking lot with their straight pipes deliberately loud enough to set everyone's teeth on edge. James was absorbed in his maps, but he was quick to notice the reflection. In the chrome coffee machine, he watched 2 men dismount their bikes, both wearing leather vests adorned with the distinctive Steel Vipers MC patches. They looked like they could be brothers. Sarah's hand was a little shaky as she sat down. "Oh, the coffee pot. Oh dear," she said quietly. "Oh, those are the ones Linda warned us about." James gave her a warm, reassuring nod. "It's okay," he said with a warm smile. "Sarah, just go about your business like normal, sweetheart." The door chimed merrily as the bikers entered. The taller one, with a lovely gray beard and kind eyes, came in first, looking quite confident. His patch on his vest identified him as the lovely Drake. His friend, who was younger and had a wiry build with a lovely snake tattoo coiling up his neck, followed close behind. The temperature in the diner felt like it dropped a few degrees. "Oh, this is cozy," Drake drawled, his voice carrying an edge of gentle mockery. "This is a lovely little place you've got here," he said, turning to Linda Chun, the owner of the rest stop, who had just emerged from the kitchen. Her face remained neutral, but James noticed her right hand sliding beneath the counter, where he knew she was hiding a welcome sign. "What can I get for you, gentlemen?" the younger biker, who went by Razor, asked with a warm, playful smile. He leaned against the counter and added with a warm smile, "How about we start with everything in the register?" The few other customers in the diner looked a little tense, but they seemed pretty relaxed. A trucker near the door slowly set down his fork, and a family of 3 huddled closer together, looking a little worried. Of the 3, the father moved quickly to shield his wife and young daughter. Drake let out a hearty chuckle, placing a comforting hand on Razor's shoulder. "Easy there, brother. We're just here to have a little chat about business." He turned to Linda with a warm smile. "Do you see this lovely stretch of highways that's now under new management? I'm happy to say that Steel Vipers are expanding our territory." James carried on looking at his maps, but his muscles tensed ever so slightly, ready for action. He'd seen this pattern before, both in the Marines and after small gangs moving into new territory. He knew how it would play out. It's always the same, isn't it? They start by intimidating people, making them afraid, before they reveal what they're really up to. Linda's voice was as calm and reassuring as ever. "This is a family establishment, so we'll take care of it together. We're perfectly safe, thank you," she said. "We all need protection, don't we?" Drake replied with a warm smile. He looked around the room with a serious expression on his face. It's so important to understand that bad things can happen to businesses that don't have the right protection in place, he said with a reassuring smile. Things happen. Equipment breaks down, supplies go missing, customers have accidents. Razor strolled over to the family's table, accidentally bumping their daughter's chair. The little girl let out a tiny whimper, clutching her mother's arm. James spoke up then, his voice calm but carrying the weight of command. The lady said she wasn't interested, and the diner fell silent again. Drake turned slowly, as if noticing James for the first time. Oh my, it looks like we've got ourselves a hero. He strolled over to the counter and stood there, looming over James. This isn't really your concern, my friend, he said kindly. At last, Old-timer James looked up from his maps and met Drake's gaze. His eyes were calm and kind, showing no fear or aggression. Oh, you're making it my business, are you? He asked with a warm smile. Drake leaned in a little closer. Oh, I do hope I might ask just who you are, he said. Do you think you're just a guy trying to enjoy his coffee? James's voice remained calm, but I've got a pretty good idea who you are. The Steel Vipers MC are a new bunch on the scene, hailing from Texas and looking to make their mark in the territory. You start off by intimidating folks at truck stops and diners, then move on to protection rackets, and then drugs. James's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. It seems like you know a lot about it. I know enough to tell you that you might want to think twice. Well, if you're looking for trouble, you've come to the right place. But if you're looking for a new spot to cause trouble, I'd suggest you find somewhere else. And if you're thinking of trying something new, we'll see how that goes for you. There was something in James's tone and the absolute certainty in his voice that made Razor hesitate. Drake looked at James more closely, noticing the way he stood tall and straight with his hands by his sides. You're the one making a mistake, he said gently, although he sounded a little unsure. James gave a little nod. It is for tonight, he replied with a warm smile. The bikers retreated another time, having tried to intimidate James. They were surprised to find that their efforts fell flat in the face of his calm resistance. As they hopped on their bikes, Drake gave a little wink and pointed 2 fingers at his eyes and then at the diner, letting them know they'd be keeping an eye on things. Once the roar of the motorcycles faded, the tension in the diner broke, and everyone let out a sigh of relief. James's father at the family table came over to him with a warm smile. Thank you so much, sir. Oh, goodness. I really don't know what would have happened if James had cut him off. I promise you, nothing is going to happen to your family here. He turned to Linda with a warm smile. You know, you might want to give Sheriff Cooper a quick call. Just let him know that the Steel Vipers are heading into his territory. Linda nodded, her eyes bright with understanding. Oh, you're already reaching for the phone. Well, they'll be back, won't they? James said with a smile, returning to his maps with more of them next time. Sarah brought him a fresh cup of coffee, her hands still a little shaky. What are we going to do, James? He asked, looking up at her with a soft, gentle expression. We're going to show them that they picked the wrong rest stop, the wrong community, and definitely the wrong veteran to mess with. But don't worry, we'll sort it out. Oh dear, this is all wrong. Oh dear, this is all wrong. We've picked the wrong rest stop, the wrong community, and definitely the wrong veteran to mess with. We put a lot of time and love into telling and preparing this story, so if you're enjoying it, please subscribe to our channel. We'd be really grateful if you could do that for us. As night fell, James stayed put at the counter, mulling over his next steps. He was pretty sure the Steel Vipers would be back the next night with reinforcements. He just couldn't let this challenge go unanswered. It would really throw a spanner in the works with their attempts to establish territory, but that's exactly what he was counting on. And he was okay with that. Sometimes the best way to stop a threat isn't to run from it or to fight it. Sometimes you've just got to let it run its course. He decided to head on, but to draw it out into the open where it could be dealt with properly. He reached for his phone and started making calls to other drivers he knew, veterans like himself who understood the importance of standing together. By the time the Steel Vipers returned, they'd find out that Crosswind June F wasn't just another rest stop. James Davidson and his community were ready to stand their ground, and they were excited to welcome the Vipers. As the sun rose over Crosswind Junction rest stop, painting the sky in shades of amber and gold, James had spent the night making calls and reaching out to his network of veteran truckers, now sitting at his usual spot at the counter. He was so happy to see them all there. He was in his usual spot at the counter, watching as familiar faces began filtering in. It was so lovely to see them all again. The lovely Linda was working the morning shift herself, serving up coffee to the growing crowd of truckers. The lovely morning regulars were there, along with some new faces, creating a wonderful atmosphere of quiet readiness. Sarah commented, tying her apron as she watched. "I've never seen it this busy this early." She started her shift, and James nodded, smiling as he looked around the room. Big Steve Johnson, a former Army Ranger turned trucker, was sitting nearby, enjoying a cup of coffee. Over at 3 tables away, Michael Doc Wilson, who'd served as a combat medic, was deep in conversation with 2 other drivers. "Guess what? None of them were here by accident. They were all friends of yours," Linda asked kindly as she filled James's cup. "Let's just say we have some things in common." James replied with a warm, friendly smile. "Particularly when it comes to keeping places like this safe and sound." The bell above the door chimed merrily as Sheriff Tom Cooper walked in. He was still in his early 40s, bless him, but the job had added years to his face. He made his way directly to their table with a warm smile on his face. James sat down on the stool next to him and heard that we had some unwelcome visitors last night. Tom said thank you and took the coffee Linda offered him. James turned slightly, his eyes meeting Tom's with a warm smile. "Just 2 of them for now, but there'll be more," he said with a reassuring smile. "Oh yes, I know about them. Oh, they've been on the move from Texas, taking over truck stops and using them as distribution hubs." James took a little sip of coffee, enjoying the warmth of the liquid as it touched his lips. "I could see some cartel symbols in their patch design that I recognized from my time in Force Recon. Oh, they're not just small-time criminals, bless them." Tom's eyebrows rose ever so slightly. "Force Recon, I had no idea you were just another trucker." James couldn't help but smile. "I did spend some time with Joint Task Force North, though, working on some really interesting counter-narcotics operations. I saw groups like the Steel Vipers turn quiet communities into war zones, which was really sad. And now they're here." Tom let out a little sigh. "James, I've got 2 lovely deputies in total." "Oh, if they come in force, they will," James interjected, "but they won't be expecting what's in store for them." The conversation came to an abrupt stop as the sound of motorcycles filled the parking lot. "Oh, and there's more than just 2 this time." 6 beautiful bikes pulled in, their chrome gleaming in the morning sun. Drake led the way, with Razor right behind him. The group was complete with Razor right behind the other 4 riders, who were new faces, each wearing the Steel Vipers colors. Inside the diner, the atmosphere shifted as the regular customers tensed up, but the truckers James had called in remained as cool as a cucumber. Big Steve made a little adjustment to his position, making sure he had a clear line to the door. Doc Wilson gave his body a little stretch as he created space around his table. The bikers came in together, their boots making a soft, heavy sound on the linoleum floor. Drake's eyes narrowed as he took in the crowd. He was clearly surprised to see so many people here so early. "Oh, it's so lovely to see you still here." Drake couldn't help but smile when he saw James. He was feeling really good about things. He did wobble a little when he saw Sheriff Cooper, but he carried on regardless, bringing some friends this time. He thought, "I'd love to continue our conversation about the new management situation." James turned slowly on his stool, his movements unhurried and relaxed. "Not much has changed since last night," he said with a warm smile. "This isn't your territory, and it's not going to be, my friend." One of the new bikers, a big, strong man with a shaved head, stepped forward. "You don't get to make that call, old man." "Hey now, easy there," Brick Drake said, looking around the room more carefully. There was something about the trucker's calm demeanor that had caught his attention. "We're just here to have a little chat about business," Drake continued, though his tone was less certain than before. But he was still trying his best to be fair. "I promise you nobody needs to get hurt," James said with a reassuring smile. "You're here to set up a drug distribution point using the same pattern you've used at other stops in the South. First, you'll make sure everyone is on side, then you'll take over the legitimate business. You'll use it as a front for moving product." Snake's hand moved towards his jacket, but before he could do anything, Big Steve's voice came through, breaking the tension. "Jacket," but before he could make a move, Big Steve's voice cut through the tension. "Oh," Steve said calmly, "I wouldn't do that if I were you. Not unless you want to find out how many amazing combat veterans are in this room right now." Drake's eyes twinkled as he took in the other truckers for the first time, recognizing how they carried themselves. You could tell from their posture that these guys weren't your average drivers. They were trained fighters trying to look like ordinary drivers, bless them. "Do you really think that bringing in a few other old-timers is going to make a difference?" Drake's voice had lost a little of its usual conviction. "I know it might be hard to accept, but this is happening whether you like it or not." James stood up slowly and carefully. His movement caught everyone's eye. Let me be really clear. I know your operation, I know your supply lines. I've spent 20 years tracking and shutting down organizations like yours, so I know what I'm talking about. You're not the first to try this, and you won't be the last, my friend. But right here, right now, you've got a choice. At that moment, Drake's hand twitched near his vest. Vest, and what choice is that? I'm really sorry, but you've got to leave. I'm sure you'll find somewhere else to sell your drugs. I know you want to make Crosswind Junction your battleground, but you're not just taking on me or these lovely people in here. You're actually taking on an entire community of veterans who've spent their lives dealing with threats. The diner fell completely silent, and even the regular customers seemed to hold their breath, watching the standoff unfold. Sheriff Cooper stayed where he was, but he was ready for anything. He had his hand near his holster, just in case. Brick took another step forward, but Drake gently grabbed his arm to stop him. James's words seemed to have a surprising effect on James. He stopped in his tracks, as if something had made him do it. Maybe the kind, steady gaze of the truckers around the room had given him pause. This is your territory, huh? Drake's voice was laced with a hint of sarcasm, but there was a hint of uncertainty beneath it. Oh no, James replied with a warm smile. It's everyone's territory, really. Oh, that's what you don't understand, my friend. Oh, we wouldn't dream of claiming it. We're just looking out for it, you know. Snake spat on the floor. Those are big words from an old man, James said, kindly correcting him. I promise you we'd love to test you. Go ahead, but remember, whatever happens next, you chose it. Drake looked at James for a long moment, then took another quick look around the room. The odds had changed a lot since last night, and he knew it. At last, he gave the signal to head towards the door. Let's go, guys, he said with a warm smile. There were plenty of other stops on this highway as the bikers filed out, chatting happily together. Drake turned back with a warm smile. This isn't over, James said quietly with a reassuring smile. Oh, it is. You just don't know it yet, sweetheart. The sound of motorcycles filled the air as the Steel Vipers departed inside. The tension slowly eased from the room. Linda let out a long, deep breath, feeling so much better after holding it in for so long. Sarah gave a little smile, her eyes brimming with tears. Sheriff Cooper stood up and gave James a kind pat on the shoulder. Don't you worry, they'll be back with more numbers next time, he said with a reassuring smile. James nodded, his eyes shining with the same determination. I'm counting on it, he replied with a warm smile. Oh, they'll see what happens when they target the wrong veteran at the wrong. As morning gave way to day, James' allies began organizing, each bringing something different to the defense of their community. The Steel Vipers thought they were dealing with just one veteran, but they were about to learn a very valuable lesson about the strength of a community that is united against a common threat. The afternoon sun beat down on Crosswind Junction as James sat with Sheriff Cooper and a growing group of truckers in the far corner of the diner, enjoying a friendly chat. The lovely Linda had thoughtfully closed off this section, giving them the privacy they needed to plan. Big Steve kindly spread out a map of the local highways on the table, marking known Steel Vipers sightings with red dots. Steve was happy to explain that they'd hit every major stop from Houston up through Oklahoma City. He traced the pattern on the map with his thick finger, noting that it was always the same. Intimidation, then take over. And then, the drugs start flowing. Doc Wilson leaned forward, his reading glasses perched on his nose with a warm smile. I've been told that they've got at least 30. I think there are full members and maybe even more prospects. They're not just any old gang, they're well organized. James nodded, looking at the map with a thoughtful expression. The lovely folks at the truck stops helped them out by acting as distribution hubs, with truckers on their payroll picking up shipments and moving them across state lines. The truck stops are great for providing cover and a legitimate business front, and we're right in the middle of their planned expansion. Sheriff Cooper added with a warm smile, pointing to their location. It's the perfect spot to control distribution along 3 major highways. Sarah approached with a steaming cup of coffee in hand. She was a little hesitant, but she knew her message was important and she was ready to share it. There's something I think you should know, she said, glancing over her shoulder with a little smile. 2 guys on. Oh, I see some bikes have been hanging around the lot for about an hour now. They're not Steel Vipers, but they're definitely keeping an eye on the place. James and Cooper exchanged looks with one another. Scouts are studying our patterns, they said together, with a smile. James was still trying to figure out where we could be most vulnerable. Big Steve James gave his knuckles a good crack and said, Let's go show them what we think about spies. No, James said with a smile, Let them watch. Let them think they're getting good intelligence. We've had to make some changes, but they're still as loyal as ever. Oh, why is that? That's why we're going to need eyes everywhere. James was happy to explain, pointing to several spots on the map. And it's not just here, but along all their likely approach routes, too. Oh, they'll come in force next time. Bless them. It would be great if you could try to overwhelm us quickly. We really need to be ready, don't you think? A new voice joined the conversation. I'd be happy to help with that. Everyone turned to see Carl Martinez, a local mechanic and regular at the truck stop, approaching their table. I served with the Army Corps of Engineers, he continued, his eyes twinkling, and I've got some ideas about how to control access to the lot if you're interested. James beckoned him to join them with a warm gesture. We'd absolutely love to hear them, he said with a warm smile. Everyone was so interested in everything at the moment. As they chatted, more and more people came over to join the conversation. There was a lovely retired school teacher who'd served in military intelligence, a sweet young waitress whose brother was currently deployed overseas, and a kind local farmer who'd been in the National Guard. Each of them had something to contribute. Information, skills, resources, they were all so generous. Linda watched from behind the counter, amazed at how quickly her quiet truck stop had transformed into what looked like a military command center. She was so proud of everyone for making it happen. She caught James's eye and gave him a little nod, her determination replacing her earlier fear. As the afternoon went on, they made plans and decided who would do what. James kept one eye on the window, watching the scouts make their passes. He thought, let them look, let them think they're seeing everything around sunset. Sarah came rushing in from taking out the trash. The bikers roared into the lot, their increased numbers a clear attempt at intimidation. Guess what? This time they didn't all come inside. Drake arrived with just Razor and 2 others, leaving the rest to circle the building menacingly on their bikes. What a lovely little war council you've got going here, Drake called with a warm smile. James stepped forward and placed himself between the bikers and the others, with a warm smile on his face. He was just enjoying a lovely coffee with friends, having a nice, friendly chat. Snake was a little jealous, but Drake held up a hand to stop him with a warm smile. He looked at James with a warm smile and said, You know, I've been asking around about you, Marcus. I've heard so many great things. Davidson Force Recon Counter-Narcotics Operations, Distinguished Service Cross recipient. Wow, what an impressive resume. If you've learned that much, then you know what happens next, my friend. And then you just take a step back. Drake's voice was firm but kind as he continued. This isn't the military, and you're not in charge here, my friend. This is business, sweetheart. James gave him a gentle correction. This is community, sweetheart. Oh, Drake, you wouldn't understand that. His eyes narrowed ever so slightly. I'm sorry, Drake, but I don't think the community can stop what's coming. I think you might have made this a bit personal, my friend. Whatever happens next, remember you chose this, my friend. James said with a smile. It is rather amusing, isn't it? I was just about to say the same thing to you. The atmosphere in the room was really charged. Both of them knew this was it, the last time. Before things got serious, Sheriff Cooper gave a little nod and moved slightly, making his presence known but maintaining his distance. Last Chance Drake offered kindly, though his tone suggested he knew the answer. Let's talk business, shall we? Let's make sure nobody gets hurt. James just stood there, still as a statue. You're absolutely right, nobody needs to get hurt. I think that's why you're going to take your lovely people and leave. Perhaps you could find another road for your drugs, another territory to terrorize, or whatever it is you're doing. Or you'll see what happens when you target the wrong veteran at the wrong rest stop. Drake looked at James for a long moment, then turned to leave. At the door, he paused for a moment. Oh dear, it looks like it's going to be war. I just hope you're ready for what that means, my friend. Once they'd roared away, Cooper approached James. Oh, my dear James, they'll hit us hard next time. No more warnings, no more talks, my friend. James nodded in agreement. That's great, he said with a warm smile. Let them come in force, my friend. The more they make a fuss, the more proof we'll have to show when we take them down. The group returned to there. They were already planning, but now there was a new sense of urgency to their preparations. The Steel Vipers had revealed their intentions. Next time, it wouldn't be about intimidation, it would be about conquest. But we'll be ready for them. As night fell, James watched more community members arrive, each bringing something to contribute to the defense of their rest stop against the Steel Vipers. It was so heartwarming to see everyone coming together like this. They thought they were dealing with just one veteran, but they were about to learn a valuable lesson about the strength of a community that's united against a common threat. "Do you really think we can stop them, Sarah?" she asked gently as she picked up the coffee cups. James gave a little smile. "We're going to stop them," he replied with a reassuring smile. "And we're going to do so much more than that. We're going to put an end to them, together." The parking lot lights came on, casting lovely long shadows across the pavement. Somewhere out there, the Steel Vipers were getting ready for battle. But here at Crosswind Junction, something different was happening. It was built on the rock-solid foundation of brotherhood, community, and the unwavering commitment of those James had vowed to protect. The battle for Crosswind Junction rest stop was about to begin, and James was making sure they'd be ready when it did. He wanted to make sure everyone was all set. Even though night had fallen at Crosswind Junction rest stop, the parking lot was still brightly lit. James stood by the window, watching with a smile as Carl Martinez and his team finished installing some extra floodlights. They'd spent the day making some lovely little changes to the lot's layout. They'd put up some concrete barriers to control access, mounted some security cameras at key points, established some clear lines of sight, and even drawn on James's old counter-narcotics experience. The lovely Sheriff Cooper was there too, ready to lend a hand. James nodded and stepped back, giving Cooper the chance to take the lead. "Let's make it so they can't surround us and force them to come in where we want them," he said with a smile. "This is Deputy Wilson," came the reply over the radio in a friendly voice. "I've got about 20 bikes gathering at the old mill, 5 miles south. They look like they're getting ready for something. Just keep your distance and keep an eye on things inside the diner, okay?" Cooper said with a smile. "The atmosphere is a little tense, but everyone's doing their best to stay calm." Big Steve and Doc Wilson have taken up a position near the entrance, while other veteran truckers are scattered throughout the space. Linda has decided to send most of her regular staff home for the day. James and Linda were trying to decide what to do next, bless them. James was feeling a bit worried about the situation, but Linda was doing her best to stay calm. She asked James if he was sure about this plan with a warm smile. James replied that they could just call in the state police and have them shut the place down for a few days, if that would help. Linda didn't think that was the best idea, sweetie. She said that if they did that, the other drivers would force them to close and then move in when they were vulnerable. She was really worried about that. She didn't think that was the best plan, bless her. She thought it would be best to face them here, on their own turf. The sound of distant motorcycles grew steadily louder. James checked his watch with a smile. It was just past midnight. "Right on schedule," he said with a smile. Sarah, who had refused to leave despite James's protests, moved closer to Linda behind the counter. "I'd love to know how many you think there are." Before James had a chance to answer, the sound of engines filled the air. As the bikes began to arrive, they came in waves, first a group of 10, then another, then more until nearly 30 motorcycles had circled the building, their riders revving engines in an intimidating display. It was quite the sight to behold. Drake led the main group through the front door with Razor and Brick right behind him, the other Steel. The Vipers arrived next, filling the diner with the comforting smell of leather and exhaust. Some of them carried chains, while others had bats, which they'd tucked away under their vests. They were such a lovely, welcoming committee. Drake called out, surveying the room with a warm smile. "Oh, it won't make any difference, don't you worry." James stepped forward, his calm presence a stark contrast to. The biker's enthusiastic approach was the perfect opportunity to step away. Drake let out a hearty laugh, which was met with a cheerful response from his companions. "Come on, old man, let's walk away. You're up against it, my friend. You're outnumbered, outgunned, and running out of time. This stop is ours now, my friend," James replied, his voice even and calm. "Numbers don't win fights, my friend. I'm sure you already know that, don't you?" "Oh, James, you really should know that," Razor teased, pulling out a chain. "Let's see what happens if we test it out." The next part of the story seemed to play out in slow motion, like a movie. Razor swung the chain, but James was already on his way in. Years of combat training kicked in as he stepped inside Razor's reach, redirecting the chain's momentum while simultaneously sweeping the biker's legs. He was ready for anything. Oh no! Razor hit the ground hard, and the chain clattered away. The room suddenly became a bit of a mess. Brick rushed forward, but was met by Big Steve's huge, welcoming fist. The lovely Doc Wilson and 2 other truckers then engaged with the nearest bikers. It was so lovely to see them all working together, and their movements were so well coordinated and precise. Oh my, these weren't just random brawlers. Oh no, these were trained fighters. Thankfully, Sheriff Cooper's voice cut through the mayhem just in time to stop Drake from pulling out a knife. I can't imagine how the sheriff must have felt, standing there so calmly with his weapon drawn. Assault with a deadly weapon is a very serious charge, so it's probably best not to add that to the list. Some more bikers tried to push forward, but they found themselves up against a well-organized defense. The veteran James had gathered and moved with military precision, showing great skill and poise. It was so lovely to see everyone working together so well, controlling the space and protecting the civilians. Even Sarah and Linda had an important part to play. They stayed safely behind the counter while they recorded everything on their phones outside. The sirens wailed as Cooper's deputies approached, accompanied by the kind state police officers who'd been stationed nearby. Oh dear, it looks like the Steel Vipers have found themselves in a bit of a pickle. They seem to have fallen into a carefully staged trap. Their superior numbers were useless in the small space you'd planned. Drake let out a little cry of frustration, realizing too late what James had done. You used us, he said, with a hint of sadness in his voice. I'm so sorry, James replied with a sad smile. Numbers don't win fights, sweetheart. That's where strategy comes in. The fight was over in the blink of an eye. Oh no. Several bikers were down. Others were. We were slowly making our way back while the sound of approaching sirens grew louder. Drake looked around, his eyes wild with fear, as he saw his advantage slipping away. Oh, this isn't over, he said, backing away from the door. Actually, it is, Cooper said gently. We've got squad cars blocking both ends of the highway, so it's best if we just wait here. Let's just take a moment to sort this out, shall we? Oh, come on, don't you think this stops anything? We've got people you don't even know about operations you can't touch, my friend. James smiled gently. I'm really grateful to you for confirming that. I'm sure the state police will be very interested to hear that. At last, Drake's face showed the realization of what had happened. Oh, goodness, no. It was just about defending the truck stop, bless them. It was all a big misunderstanding. It was a staged operation to get the Steel Vipers to incriminate themselves and gather evidence of their larger criminal enterprise. Oh my. You son of a Drake lunged at James, but never completed his move. James was quick to sidestep, using Drake's own momentum against him and having him face down on the floor in seconds. The floor was covered in seconds, arm locked behind his back, just like I said. James spoke quietly, holding Drake down. You picked the wrong veteran to mess with, my friend, he said with a gentle smile. Thankfully, the police were on the scene in no time at all and were able to take control of the situation. The Steel Vipers were safely disarmed and taken into custody, and the relevant evidence was collected. We also took statements. James gave a little nod. This was never just about defending the truck stop, was it? He said with a gentle smile as they watched the bikers being loaded into police vehicles. Cooper shook his head, a little smile playing on his lips. I had to draw them out, get them to show their hand, he explained with a warm smile. Now we've got probable cause for a larger investigation, which is great. Linda approached, surveying the minimal damage to her beloved diner with a warm smile. It's all over now, don't you worry, she said, her voice soft and reassuring. James watched the last of the Steel Vipers being taken away, feeling a little sad. This was just the beginning, he replied, his expression softening into a warm smile. Right, now we go after their whole organization. He paused for a moment, his gaze hardening ever so slightly. But don't you worry, they won't be bothering Crosswind. As we made our way back to the junction, we noticed that the car park was gradually clearing up. The roar of motorcycles had given way to the quiet hum of the rest stop's normal operation. Sarah started tidying up the little bit of mess from the scuffle while Big Steve and the others helped put everything back in the dining room. James went back to his usual spot at the counter and was delighted to accept a cup of coffee from the lovely Linda. Fresh coffee from the lovely Linda, just what I needed. The night's events had been so well planned. It was a clever plan, a tactical operation that looked like a simple defense of territory. The Steel Vipers had thought they'd find an old veteran trying to play the hero. Instead, they'd stumbled right into a clever trap set by a man who'd spent his whole life taking down bigger and more dangerous organizations. You just knew they'd come in force. Cooper said, joining James at the counter, that they'd try to overwhelm us with numbers, bless their hearts. James nodded, saying that people like that are pretty easy to read. They only know one way to solve problems with force, which makes them easy to manipulate. It's so sad, really. If you understand their psychology, you'll see that the first light of dawn is already beginning to creep over the horizon. Thankfully, Over-the-horizon Crosswind Junction had made it through its first major battle, but we all knew the war was far from over. Oh, I do hope the rest of the Steel Vipers organization is okay. It looks like they've got themselves into a spot of bother trying to take over a simple rest stop. I really feel for them. The morning light was streaming through the windows of Sheriff Cooper's office as James studied the evidence board they'd put together. There were lots of photos of the arrested Steel Vipers members, and a map showing the suspected drug routes was another big section. The lovely Deputy Wilson was busy updating the board was a great way to show all the information from the night's arrests. Drake wasn't talking, but that was to be expected. Cooper said, entering with 2 cups of coffee, but Razor's a different story. It's so interesting how a few hours in lockup can really change a person's perspective on loyalty. Oh, I wonder what he's giving us? James was really grateful for the coffee and took down all the names, dates, and locations. James nodded and said that it seems the Steel Vipers are just the muscle. He was absolutely right. Oh my, they were working with the infamous Mexican cartel, the Zetas. They were using truck stops as distribution points across 5 states. It was a classic structure, if you ask me. The cartel provided the product and protection, while the gang provided local control. It was a great partnership. James had seen this same structure dozens of times before, bless him. With a flourish, Deputy Wilson pinned another photo to the board. Razor then mentioned a name to the board, Diego Ramirez. James looked at Ramirez with a steady gaze. "You're sure about that?" he asked, his voice soft and gentle. "Yeah, why? I'd love to know more. In my last operation before retiring, we almost caught him moving product across the border, but he managed to slip away. We lost 2 great guys in that." James and Cooper were in the office when Linda walked in, carrying a box of donuts. She said, "I thought you boys could do with a bite to eat." She put the box down and then went to have a look at the evidence board. She said, "Oh my, these Steel Vipers are even bigger than we thought. Much, much bigger." Cooper was happy to confirm that their rest stop was just the latest target in a major expansion plan. It seems they've been gradually taking over transportation hubs and building a distribution network. James's phone buzzed. He checked the message and then looked up with a smile. He said, "I've just heard from my contact in Texas. Guess what? Steel Viper leadership is calling an emergency meeting. Our little operation got their attention." Cooper said hopefully, "Maybe they'll back off." James shook his head, a little smile playing on his lips. "Oh, they can't afford to. We've managed to disrupt their supply line and embarrass them publicly, which I think is pretty impressive. Oh, they'll hit back hard, poor things." Sarah burst into the office, looking a little flustered. Her face was pale, poor thing. "You really need to see this." They followed her outside, where they could see what she was looking at. They were just across the street from the sheriff's office. A Steel Viper. Prospect was painting a message on the wall. "War is coming." Before anyone could say Jack Robinson, 3 bikes roared past their riders. Oh my! Glass was smashed as some nasty-looking Molotov cocktails exploded against the pavement. Oh my! Flames are spreading across the street. Oh my, everyone back! James called out in a loud, reassuring voice. Thankfully, James was there to pull Sarah to safety just in time, as Cooper called for the fire brigade. The bikes had already disappeared around the corner, leaving chaos in their wake as the emergency crews arrived to handle the fire. James looked at the graffiti message. The paint was still wet and was dripping down the wall like blood. "They're getting worse," Cooper said, joining him, making it personal. It already was personal. "Oh dear, it looks like they're showing their hand back at Crosswind Junction." Big Steve and the other veterans had transformed the rest stop into a fortress, with security cameras keeping a close eye on everything and concrete barriers controlling access to the lot. Our lovely customers still came and went as usual, but they were watched, evaluated, and access to the lot was controlled. The visitors came and went, but everyone was watched and evaluated with the greatest care. They were keeping a close eye on things on the South Road, just in case. The lovely Doc Wilson let us know via radio that he was set up in an observation post with a clear view of approaching traffic. There were 3 bikes just keeping an eye on things for now. James nodded and then turned to Cooper. "I think they're probing, looking for weaknesses. The attack downtown was just to show they can hit us anywhere, poor things. I can request state police support if you think that would be helpful," Cooper said. "Not yet, sweetheart. Let's not give them the chance to think they've got us rattled, okay?" James pulled out his phone and showed Cooper a series of messages. "My old contacts are coming through. I'm getting some great intel on Steel Vipers," he said with a smile. Linda, who had been listening nearby, approached James and asked what they wanted. James was happy to explain that the cartel needs reliable distribution routes, and that the Steel Vipers provide that by controlling key transport hubs. But it's not just about drugs, it's about power. They really can't let a small rest stop successfully resist them. Bless them. If word got out, others might get ideas, and we wouldn't want that, would we? James went over to the window and watched the bikers make their slow passes. He let them look, because he knew they wouldn't see what mattered throughout the day. We heard more reports coming in. It was a bit of a nail-biting night in the region as Vipers members got together in little groups all over the place. Local businesses said they'd been intimidated, and it seemed like the gang was flexing its muscles to show strength after the previous night's defeat. Evenings were particularly tense, and poor Sarah jumped at every motorcycle sound while the ever-vigilant Linda kept checking the security cameras. Even the veteran trucker seemed a little on edge, knowing that somewhere out there, the Steel Vipers were planning their revenge. James was sitting at his usual spot, looking relaxed on the surface but really missing nothing. His phone buzzed with another message, this one from an old military contact. The contents made him smile, though it was a rather grim smile. "What's up?" Cooper asked, noticing James's expression. "Oh, do you remember how Razor mentioned Diego Ramirez? I just got the lovely news that he's personally coming up from Mexico to handle this situation." "Oh dear, that doesn't sound good, does it?" "Actually," James said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "It's exactly what we've been hoping for. The Steel Vipers are just the local muscle, but Ramirez is the real target. If we can catch him here, we can take down the entire operation together. So they're really set on this, bless them." Cooper started, and poor Ramirez can't afford to lose this territory. James finished with a smile. "They'll come at us with everything they have, and that's great. That's absolutely perfect. This time, we'll be ready for all of them, and we're going to do great." As night fell over Crosswind Junction, the atmosphere grew increasingly tense. Oh my, there are more bikes around, and the riders seemed to be getting more and more aggressive. Everyone was aware that the Steel Vipers would be responding, and it was clear that it would be quite an intense encounter. But when James looked around the rest stop, he saw not fear but determination. The community had come together and found its strength. What the Steel Vipers and their cartel backers didn't realize was that they weren't just fighting one veteran. They were up against an entire community that had decided to take a stand. "War is coming," James said gently, glancing at the graffiti message visible from the window. "But they have no idea what kind of war they've started." The late afternoon sun cast long, inviting shadows across Crosswind Junction as James met with a group of trusted allies in the back office. The room had been transformed into a makeshift command center, with maps and surveillance photos covering every wall. Big Steve was keeping a lookout outside, while the wonderful Doc Wilson helped to put together the latest intelligence. James nodded and smiled as he pointed to a series of photos. "Ramirez is definitely on the move," he explained. "Our friends saw him crossing the border yesterday. He's got a small security team with him, trying to stay under the radar." Sheriff Cooper leaned forward, his eyes bright with interest as he studied the images. "How on earth did you manage to get these so quickly?" Old friends from Joint Task Force North. "They've been keeping a close eye on Ramirez for years, just waiting for him to make a little mistake." James tapped one photo, which showed Rira's meeting with the leaders of Steel Viper. "This is his mistake, sweetheart." She gave a little knock and came in, her eyes getting quite big at the sheer amount of evidence on display. "Is that him, the cartel guy?" she asked, her voice full of curiosity. James nodded. Diego Ramirez started out as a small-time enforcer, bless his heart. He worked his way up the ladder, and now he's in charge of drug distribution across 3 states. "Oh, those Steel Vipers are just his latest attempt to expand territory." As she came here, Sarah's voice trembled ever so slightly. "Oh, he really has to," Cooper interjected. "We've disrupted his operation and embarrassed his people in his world, so he's going to have to respond in some way." The radio crackled with Big Steve's voice. "Just a heads up. I've spotted 2 SUVs with Texas plates doing slow passes of the lot. I'm sorry, James, but I don't recognize the drivers." She went to the window and watched the black vehicles cruise past. The advance team was scouting for Ramirez to make sure it's safe for him to come in. Linda popped her head into the office, her face showing how she was feeling. "Guess what? She just got a call from Mike at the Highway 40 rest stop. Guess what? The Steel Viper showed up that morning and threatened to burn the place." James explained, his voice filled with concern, that they were being isolated. It was a classic cartel tactic, bless him. Cooper's phone buzzed. He checked his phone and looked up, his expression showing he was worried. Oh no! The state police had just found one of his deputies, beaten up behind the gas station. They'd left him a message, saying that they'd either back down or more people would get hurt. James looked really worried. He said with a sad smile, "I'm really worried that more people might get hurt. I think they're pushing us to make a mistake," he told the group in a gentle, reassuring tone. "I'm really worried that they'll keep hurting people until we either give in or react emotionally." Sarah asked, "What can we do to help?" James replied, "Let's stick to the plan and let them think we're doing something else." Meanwhile, James pulled out his phone and showed them a series of text messages. "My contacts have been keeping an eye on Steel Viper and have been gathering their forces, bringing in members from other chapters. But that's not the most important thing, my friend." He pointed to a particular message, his eyes twinkling with excitement. "Oh, and Ramirez isn't just coming to deal. Oh, and he's bringing a big shipment with him. He wants to show everyone that nothing can stop his operation." "Oh, Cooper, you're sure about this?" "I'm absolutely certain. He's got a big ego and he really believes he's something special. Oh, bless him. He thinks a small rest stop like this one can't resist him. He just wants to show everyone what he's capable of." Doc Wilson, who had been quietly studying the evidence, piped up. "Oh dear, if he's bringing product with him, that means federal jurisdiction. DA, FBI, all of them." James finished, "But we have to catch him in the act if he just shows up." "Intimidate us? Don't worry, we've got nothing to fear." The radio crackled again, and we heard more bikes coming in from the south. "Oh, it looks like they're setting up observation posts." James gave a little nod. "They'll keep an eye on us for a little while, see how we do things, and then let us get on with it. It's so lovely that they're seeing everything just as we want them to." Linda crossed her arms, looking a little exasperated. "What about my lovely customers and my wonderful staff? I just can't risk putting them in danger." "Don't you worry, I've already taken care of it." James gave her a reassuring smile and said, "Don't you worry. When this is all over, we'll make sure that all the genuine customers get out safely. Don't worry, we're working closely with the state police to make sure everyone is safe and sound." James turned to Cooper with a smile and said, "We need to send a message of our own. Let them know that hurting your deputy was a mistake." Cooper's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "What kind of message would you like to send?" he asked kindly. "The kind that makes them angry, makes them sloppy. Ramirez is just too smart and too controlled, bless him. I think we need to get the Steel Vipers involved to nudge him into taking action before he's ready." As they chatted about their next move, the black SUVs made another loop of the rest stop, this time going inside one. A man was chatting away on the phone, reporting their observations to someone higher up the chain. They had no idea that every move they made was being photographed, documented, and added to the growing pile of evidence. As the sun started to set, we saw more and more motorcycles around Crosswind Junction. The Steel Vipers were becoming more confident, and it was lovely to see. They wanted everyone to feel the pressure to understand that resistance was a bit outdated. But back at the office, James and his friends kept on going. As they planned, the walls filled up with more photos and more connections, which was really great to see. As the hours went by, James and his friends were able to piece together a clearer picture of Ramirez's operation. James told the group as they got ready to start the next part of their plan, "Everything that happens in the next few days has to look totally natural. It's so important that we believe we're in control and that our intimidation is working. If something unexpected happens, we'll just have to switch to our backup plan. We're not just fighting for a rest stop anymore, we're fighting for every community these people have terrorized. It's so important to remember that." As the meeting came to a close, James lingered in the office, his gaze fixed on photographs of Ramirez from 2 decades ago. He'd come so close to catching him at the border, and now fate had given him another chance. This time, he had something really special on his side. He had a whole community standing together against a common enemy. The radio crackled again, and James heard more bikes coming in. "Oh, it looks like they're getting ready for something big." "That's great," James said, smiling. "So are we?" The first attack came just before midnight. A dozen shiny new bikes roared into the nearly empty parking lot of Crosswind Junction. Their bikes moved in a practiced formation, as if they had done this many times before. James and his team were keeping a close eye on things from inside, with security cameras tracking the approach of the bikers. "Here we go," James said quietly, smiling as he watched the bikers position themselves strategically around the building. Brick was at the front of the group. Oh, Drake wasn't among them. Brick was the one who had led the group, but he was still in custody. They got off their bikes together. Brick approached the main entrance, his face twisted in a playful sneer. "Come on out, old man," he called in a jovial manner. "Time to finish what we started, my friend." Linda held onto her baseball bat with a reassuring grip, while Sarah stayed behind the counter, phone recording everything. Big Steve and Doc Wilson stood guard at the entrance, while other veteran truckers kept watch throughout the diner. "Do you remember James told us all? Let's give them the chance to make the first move. It's so important to make sure that everything is clearly self-defense." Brick's voice carried over the chaos, breaking the tension as bricks came through the windows. "Oh, this is what happens when you mess with the steel vipers," he said with a warm smile. More lovely bikers appeared from the darkness, bringing the total to around 20. They started to attack the building in a methodical way, breaking windows and spray painting. "Just a heads up, guys. Looks like there are threats on the walls. Let's hold position for now," James said, as some of the truckers moved to respond. "Not yet, my friend," Sheriff Cooper's voice crackled over the radio. "The state police are on their way. They'll be here in 2 minutes. You sure about this, James?" "Absolutely," James replied with a smile. "Let them go for it, guys. Give them a taste of their own medicine." Snake, feeling a little impatient, kicked in the front door. "Oh, what's the matter, hero? Oh, don't be like that. You're not so tough without your cop friends around, are you?" "Oh, that's okay." A few bikers rushed forward, led by Snake. "Oh my!" They made it just 3 steps into the diner before the trap was sprung. All of a sudden, bright lights came on from hidden spots, momentarily blinding the attackers. But the veteran truckers were ready for them. They moved with military precision, making sure to neutralize any potential threats before they even had a chance to react. Snake was caught with a perfect tackle by Big Steve, who gave him a little bump that sent him flying into the floor. The lovely Doc Wilson and 2 others took care of his closest helpers. The remaining bikers were in for a surprise when they found themselves up against a well-organized defense. Outside, the police were there in a flash, sirens blaring as they moved in to block the escape routes that the bikers had carefully planned. "I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but it would be a great help to us if you could drop your weapons." Cooper's voice boomed through a megaphone in a reassuring tone. "I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but the building is surrounded." Some bikers tried to run, but sadly found their bikes mysteriously disabled. Carl Martinez's contribution to the plan was that others surrendered immediately, realizing they were sadly outmatched. "Oh, my friend, you don't know what you've started. Oh my, it's going to be a rough time when Ramirez gets here." "That's exactly what we were hoping to hear," James said, holding up a phone that had been recording everything with a warm smile. "Guess what? We've found a clear connection between the Steel Vipers and Ramirez. Oh, it's definitely admissible." Thankfully, the fight was over in minutes, with most of the Steel Vipers in custody. Thankfully, the damage to property was significant, but it was all kept under control exactly as James had planned. "You set this up, Snake," he said with a smile as state troopers cuffed him. "You used us to get evidence. You made it so easy for us." James replied, "People like you always react the same way with force and threats. I understand why you're doing it, but I think there might be a better way to handle things. It's as expected, but we got the job done, and that's what matters." The arrested bikers were loaded into transport vehicles, all ready for their journey to the station. Cooper joined James inside, and they had a little chat. "Guess what? We've caught them twice now. Oh, they'll be even more desperate now." "That's great," James nodded with a warm smile. This was just the warm-up, and he was excited to see what would happen next. "Upstairs, the real target is still coming with more people," Sarah said quietly, still recording with her phone. James was totally on board, but now we've got some pretty solid evidence linking them to Ramirez that really changes everything. The radio crackled with an urgent message from one of their lookouts. Multiple vehicles were approaching from the south. "Let's put an end to SUVs with armed escorts." James went to the window and watched the approaching convoy, which was right on schedule. "Oh, Ramirez wants to see the situation for himself. Bless him." 4 sleek black SUVs rolled past, slowly, their windows tinted just enough to hide the occupants completely. In the second vehicle, a man in an expensive suit was just visible, studying the scene with a keen interest. "Oh, there he is." Diego Ramirez himself was coming to take a look at the damage to his operation and see if there's anything he can do to fix it. The convoy didn't stop, but the message was clear. The real battle was about to begin. Ramirez wasn't like the Steel Vipers, who were a different breed of criminal altogether. He was a clever, patient, and completely ruthless character. What now? Cooper asked as the SUVs disappeared into the night. Well, now we just have to wait, James replied with a smile. Oh, I'm sure he'll want to re-establish control quickly. He'll want to show everyone that his organization is unstoppable. When he makes his move, we'll be ready for him. James smiled, his face a picture of grim determination. Don't you worry, we'll be ready inside the diner. And so the cleanup began. The windows were boarded up, the glass swept away, and any evidence carefully preserved. There was a new, exciting tension in the air. It was clear to everyone that Ramirez's appearance meant the conflict was escalating beyond simple gang violence. You've had the pleasure of dealing with him before, Linda said to James with a warm smile. In the Marines, what can we expect? He'll be subtle at first, don't you worry. James explained, checking his phone for updates from his network of contacts. Oh, don't you worry. They'll probably try to offer us money to try to buy us off. If that doesn't work, they'll try to threaten our families and divide us. But they'll only resort to violence when they know they can get away with it, poor things. When they do, it'll be a lot to take in. Sarah shuddered. Do you think we can really stand up to someone like that? James gave her a warm, reassuring pat on the shoulder. We already are, he said with a warm smile. Everything that's happened, the fights, the arrests, we've been through it together, and we'll get through it together again. We'll get through this together, I promise. Oh, and the damage to property is just the start. It's all helping to build a case against the Steel Vipers and Ramirez's entire operation, which is great. As the night grew quiet again, everyone was still on edge. As the night drew on, we could hear more bikes riding around and keeping an eye on the Steel Vipers. Oh dear, they weren't finished yet, and now they had cartel backing to worry about. So, it was time for a little rest. James told the group with a smile. Tomorrow, we'll show them what happens when they bring a cartel. War on our doorstep. As the sun rose over Crosswind Junction rest stop, the full extent of last night's damage was revealed. It was a sad sight to see. The damage was still there to see, with boarded windows and spray-painted threats standing as stark reminders of the Steel Vipers' attack. But inside, James was thinking about something else entirely. He sat down with Sheriff Cooper and two lovely DEA agents who'd arrived bright and early that morning, going over the latest intel on Ramirez's operation. Our sources told us the wonderful agent Lisa Torres was happy to confirm that he's setting up a major distribution hub. She was happy to share photos across the table, explaining that the Steel Vipers were just phase 1. They were there to intimidate local businesses and establish control of transport routes. And now for the exciting part. Phase 2 is the actual drug pipeline. James was really pleased to look at a photo of Ramirez meeting up with other leaders from the cartel. He was really pleased to see that he's expanding so quickly. This is about so much more than just one rest stop. No more, agreed Agent Mike Phillips, pointing to a map marked with suspicious activity. He's building a network of every truck stop and every rest area from Texas to Kansas, turning them all into potential distribution points. It's a conservative estimate, but we're looking at $500 million a year. Cooper let out a soft whistle. No wonder he came, James interjected. It's not just about money, though. We also have to think about Ramirez's reputation, don't we? If word gets out that a small rest stop successfully resisted him, others might try the same, which would be a shame. We really can't let that happen, though. This might be our best chance to catch him at the meeting, Torres finished with a smile. The meeting was suddenly interrupted by the arrival of Big Steve, who seemed to be in a bit of a hurry. There was a bit of a commotion on the South Road, and 3 black SUVs pulled up. Oh, it was the same group that had been there the night before. Everyone rushed to the window to see what was going on. Oh, this time they didn't just drive past the convoy. They pulled into the car park and parked in a defensive formation. A group of men, all dressed in expensive suits, got out of the vehicles. It was clear from their bulges under their jackets that they were carrying weapons. Here we go, James said in a soft, reassuring voice. Just remember, let them make the first move, okay? Ramirez stepped out last, looking very dapper in his designer suit and striding with a confident air that marked him as the leader. He was a little shorter than James had expected, but he carried himself with the authority of someone who was used to being in charge. Oh my absolute power! The cartel leader made his way into Crosswind Junction, accompanied by 4 of his trusted guards. He looked around at the damage from last night's attack, then focused on James with a warm smile. Good morning, Mr. Davidson, Ramirez said with a warm smile. I think we have a few things to chat about. James stood there, looking calm and collected, with Ramirez between him and, oh, the others, there's absolutely nothing to discuss. Oh, Ramirez, this isn't your territory. His smile didn't falter. Everything is my territory, Mr. Davidson, and I'm happy to discuss anything you'd like. The only thing we need to figure out is how to make this transition work for everyone. He gently pointed to the damaged windows. Oh, it's not a pretty sight, is it? Oh, Cooper, my friend, I'm afraid the only transition happening here is you going to prison, he said firmly. One of Ramirez's guards reached inside his jacket, but the cartel leader held up a hand, indicating he'd like to take a moment to think things through. Please, we're all here to do business, after all. Let's try to avoid violence if we can, he said kindly. He turned back to James with a warm smile. I'm happy to offer you $2 million in cash untraceable. Why don't you just walk away and forget what you've seen? James didn't blink and didn't look interested. I'd be happy to offer you $3 million up front, with the option of monthly payments to ensure your continued cooperation. I'm really sorry, but I'm afraid the answer is still no. Ramirez's smile slowly disappeared. I'm really sorry to have to tell you this, but you're making a very dangerous mistake. Take a moment to think. Is this little rest stop worth dying for? James replied evenly. I'm sure you'll agree that's a question you need to ask yourself, James. I know it's a tough call, but is it worth losing everything? The cartel leader studied James more carefully now that James had revealed his military history. James had done some pretty impressive work in Joint Task Force North, and he'd been causing problems for the cartel. James was about to cause a bit of a stir. Ramirez's expression became more serious. James was very clear. He now owned the territory. He had the best of the best working for him, including the local law enforcement. Guess what? Even the state police had commanders on his payroll. James was really struggling here. Maybe James agreed, but he was still going to fight anyway. Oh, Mr. Davidson, everyone has a price. We all have things in our lives that we care about more than principles. James was well aware of this. He knew it was true of Linda's friend, bless her. James's daughter is at college in sunny California, and his dear mother is in Arizona, where she's getting the care she needs. His son, Sheriff Cooper, is on the police force in Oklahoma City. Oh, it would be such a terrible shame if anything happened to them. James took a step forward, his voice soft and gentle. He was putting families in danger. Oh, that's not a line you'd want to cross, is it? I cross whatever lines I choose, but I don't mean any harm. Ramirez replied, his voice calm and steady. I'd love for you to think about my offer for the next 24 hours. After that, he smiled again, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Let's do this the hard way, Ramirez said with a smile as he turned to leave. James called after him, his voice soft and gentle. You're not the first cartel leader I've had to take down, I'm afraid. You won't be the last, he said with a warm smile. The leader paused at the door, looking back at James with a hint of sadness in his eyes. Oh, Mr. Davidson, he replied with a warm smile. I'm not like the others you faced, my friend. They were just businessmen trying to play at being soldiers. I'm a bit of a mixed bag, really. I'm a soldier playing at being a businessman. Just a little reminder for you. Remember that after the convoy departed. Cooper turned to James with a warm smile. Oh, he wasn't bluffing about those threats, bless him, he said. Oh, no, he wasn't, James said with a worried look on his face. Torres, my dear friend, could you possibly get protective details on those families as soon as possible? She replied with a smile. Good news. We've already got teams in place since we identified Ramirez's presence. He's absolutely right. He's got people everywhere we can't trust normal channels. James nodded, and then we all agreed that we could trust our people. Doc, could you give us a hand on the radio and call in every? Steve, our veteran trucker, you're our eyes and ears out there. We're so grateful for all you do. We'd be really grateful if you could spread the word to your friends in the Mechanics Association. It would be a great help to us if you could keep an eye out for anyone who isn't on Ramirez's payroll. What do you think he'll do first, Sarah? She asked, her voice trembling ever so slightly. James explained, he'll try to isolate us. We've seen it all, and it's been tough. Pressure, accidents, vandalism, anonymous threats. We've been through it all. But we absolutely can't let him win. Linda, we've got to give him a little encouragement, don't you think? Oh, he thinks he's got us on the run, bless him. But we're going to show him he's wrong, and we'll do it together. He's probably thinking that we're struggling and turning against each other. We just need to be careful, though, don't you think? We just need to be careful not to let our guard down, otherwise he'll get a bit sloppy. Oh, that's a dangerous game, Agent Phillips said with a little frown. These guys aren't just your average street thugs like the Steel Vipers, Marcus replied with a reassuring smile. They're professional killers, bless them. I know exactly what they are, James said with a warm smile. That's why we've got to wrap this up here. Oh, Ramirez isn't just threatening us, bless him. He's threatening everyone, bless him. And he's doing it all along his distribution route, poor guy. If we don't put a stop to this now, who knows how many other families he'll end up hurting. The rest of the day was spent getting everything ready. It was so lovely to see our veterans arriving in a steady stream, each one bringing their own special skills and resources. The lovely Carl Martinez and his wonderful crew installed some hidden cameras and sensors. The wonderful Doc Wilson set up a safe and secure network. We made sure to set up a communication network to keep everyone safe and sound. But it wasn't just a simple setup, oh no. It was a whole new level of security. As night fell, we saw more steel vipers appearing, circling the property with increasing boldness. They were just the visible threat. Everyone knew Ramirez's professional killers were out there too, watching and waiting. It was such a worrying time for everyone. 24 hours later, Cooper mused, joining James at his usual spot at the counter. Do you think we're ready? James checked his phone, reading the latest updates from his network of contacts with a warm smile. We're ready, let's do this. The big question is, are they ready for what's coming? Do you really think this will work? And then, slowly but surely, drawing them in and making them think they're winning. Oh yes, it has. James replied with a little smile, but his voice was grim. He was really hoping it would work, but if it didn't, it would be a disaster. As the night drew on, the group of bikes that had been circling grew bolder and bolder. You could feel it in the air, couldn't you? It was like the calm before the storm, but don't worry, it'll be over soon. Ramirez had made his threat and set his deadline. It was only a matter of time before everything would fall apart at Crosswind Junction rest stop. Bless it. But this time, James and his allies weren't just defending a business. They were defending something much more precious. They were taking down a cartel. And every move had to be absolutely perfect. As soon as the sun rose, the pressure began to mount. First, James and his team made some quick phone calls to Linda's suppliers. Then, out of the blue, some customers canceled. Oh, and there were also some mysterious delivery problems. By mid-morning, there was fuel. It was such a shame to see trucks being turned away at highway checkpoints by police officers who just needed to verify some paperwork. James watched it all unfold from his usual spot, noting each move in Ramirez's campaign of isolation, right on schedule. He was so proud of how well it was going. He confided in Cooper. It looks like he's trying to cut off our supply lines, first trying to starve us. Out Sarah asked, overhearing as she kindly refilled coffee cups. James was eager to show us just how much control he has, how many people are on his payroll, every canceled delivery, every police stop. It's a message, the radio crackled with Big Steve's voice in a friendly, reassuring tone. Guess what? I've got more company. Oh dear, it looks like Steel Viper is setting up at both exits. The lovely folks at the away exits are kindly turning away trucks and letting them know that Crosswind Junction is temporarily closed due to some minor health code violations. Cooper checked his phone, his face a picture of concern. He'd just heard the wonderful news that the state health inspector is on his way. Oh, he'll find all kinds of problems, of course he will. James gave a little nod. Ramirez is such a thorough guy. He'll do everything he can to resolve things legally before. It's always best to avoid violence if possible, as it makes it harder to prove criminal intent. We'd all like to avoid that, wouldn't we? Linda came out of her office, looking a little pale. Guess what? The bank just called. Oh dear, there's a little hiccup with our business loan. Oh dear, they're threatening to call in the full amount by the end of the week. He's doing a fantastic job, Agent Torres. He's using all the right tactics to get things done. It seems there are a few unrelated issues that are proving difficult to prove, but I'm sure we'll get there. James stood up and gathered everyone around. This is just the start, guys. Don't worry, we'll get through this together. Next, they'll probably try to isolate us and make us feel vulnerable by sending anonymous threats and causing minor accidents. It's like they're trying to break us down, poor things. Sarah's phone buzzed. She checked her phone, her hand trembling a little. Oh my goodness, someone had sent pictures of her mum. Oh, they've been following her and mine too. Linda added, showing similar surveillance photos of her daughter. The message says we should think about our loved ones before it's too late. It's a good reminder to cherish those we love. Oh, we all knew the price of supporting Crosswind Junction. James explained, he's trying to break our spirit. Make us feel like we're all alone against the odds. The lovely Doc Wilson came in with a laptop and said, "You really need to see this." He opened the screen, and there was a live stream from a hidden camera. Oh dear. It seems that some folks from Steel Viper have been up to no good. They've been vandalizing cars in town, but only those belonging to people known to frequent Crosswind Junction. They were sending a little message to our lovely customers. Cooper let out a low growl, his eyes narrowing as he warned, "Stay away or face the consequences." James checked his watch with a smile. Just 14 hours to go until Ramirez's deadline. Oh, he'll just keep on pushing the boundaries, bless him. Make each hour feel longer than the last, my friend. The afternoon brought more pressure, but we got through it together. Oh my! A health inspector arrived and, goodness, he found some critical violations that would normally take weeks to discover. Oh dear, those tax auditors showed up at Linda's house. Sarah's mum was in a real state, calling to say someone had broken into her house, but taken nothing. They'd just left evidence that they could get to her anytime, poor thing. Cooper thought it would be a good idea to call in the state police, as we were getting lots of reports of intimidation. I think we can all agree that we can't trust them, so let's not do anything until we know who's clean and who's compromised. James got his closest colleagues together in the back office. This is all following the cartel playbook, which I've seen before, but I'm sure we can handle it. They isolate, intimidate, and then offer a way out. It's a pretty standard playbook, but it's always worth remembering that they're only human, too. It's so sad. Right now, everyone who supports us is paying a price. I know, Ramirez, I know. I think he'll make another offer, probably through intermediaries. I think he'll probably say that everything will go back to normal if we just step aside, sweetie. Oh, I really hope it doesn't come to that. Linda asked, her voice tight with worry. And then we'll move on to phase 3. I think he'll wait until he thinks we're broken and desperate for a solution before he takes direct action. Big Steve's voice came through the radio in a reassuring tone. Guess what? There's been some movement on the South Road. Guess what? It looks like the whole Steel Viper chapter is heading this way. Everyone rushed to the windows, excited to see what all the fuss was about. A huge group of bikes was approaching, led by Brick, who'd been released from jail that morning. It was so lovely to see him back on the road. They didn't attack, but just formed a lovely circle around the rest stop. The engines were roaring, making quite an impressive display of force. James pointed out, "Oh, look at the patches." It was so lovely to see patches from all the different chapters. The wonderful Ramirez has called in every Steel Vipers member in 3 states. The bikers stayed in their circle, a lovely reminder of all the good people working together. Against Crosswind Junction, it was so lovely to see that every few minutes one would break formation to hassle any customer trying to approach. As the sun started to set, Ramirez's black SUVs made another appearance, driving slowly and deliberately, making sure everyone saw them. Torres observed that he was watching, measuring our reaction to all this pressure. Sarah, who'd been quiet most of the day, suddenly spoke up. Guess what? My mum just called again. She told us that a lovely man had paid her a visit. He was ever so polite. Dressed, he offered to buy her house for twice its value if she could convince her daughter to be reasonable. And the same goes for my lovely daughter, Linda. Guess what? She's received a full scholarship offer from a prestigious university, all expenses paid. All she needs now is for me to make the right decision. Cooper checked his phone, his eyes twinkling with excitement. Guess what? My son's police department is offering him a major promotion. All he has to do is have a little chat with his old man. James nodded, his expression serious but understanding. Ramirez is showing us that he can play a part in helping us, or he can play a part in hurting us. It's up to us to decide, my friends. Wilson approached with a warm smile. The lovely folks at the surveillance center have put together some new footage, and they've set up observation posts along all the approach routes. They're keeping a record of everyone who comes and goes. James took a close look at the footage, making notes on target lists. I'm really sorry to say that anyone who still supports us is now a target. I just wish there was something we could do. Sarah asked, her hands shaking a little as she poured coffee. We're fighting back, James replied with a reassuring smile. We're keeping a close eye on everything they do, every threat they make, and every bribe they offer. But we have to let them think they're winning, sweetheart. Torres nodded, and you could see the light bulb go on in his mind. The more pressure they apply, the more evidence they gather, bless them. But it's a bit risky, don't you think? Oh, they might just snap and decide to eliminate us. Oh, they won't, James said with a reassuring smile. Oh, don't worry about that. Ramirez is just too careful for that. He wants to break us, not make us martyrs. I'm sure we can all agree that a rest stop standing up to intimidation is one thing. A mass casualty event would be a bit too much to handle. Carl Martinez popped in with some technical updates. He got all the new cameras in place, which is great. If anyone so much as sneezes within half a mile of here, we'll have it on video, he said with a smile. Oh, that's wonderful, James, she replied with a smile. Because the real show's about to start. As if on cue, every phone in the room buzzed at once. On each screen, a kind message was displayed. A generous cash offer, followed by surveillance photos of loved ones going about their daily routines. It was pretty clear what they wanted. Take the money or risk everything. Right on schedule, James said quietly, giving them one last warning before things get serious. What do we do? Jenny asked, her eyes fixed on the photos of her mother. James stood up and addressed everyone. We do exactly what Ramirez expects, my dear friends. We just need to look a little scared, act a little desperate, and make him think his plan is working perfectly. Then Linda will make her demand, and we'll bring the trap we've been setting since this whole thing began. James smiled, his expression serious but kind. Oh, Ramirez thinks he's breaking us, bless him. But what he doesn't realize is that every move he's made, every threat, every bribe, it's all evidence. When this is all over, he won't just lose a rest stop, he'll lose everything. I really feel for him. Cooper's radio crackled with an excited voice on the other end. Oh my, there's a gathering of bikes at the old mill. It looks like they're getting ready for something big. Oh, this is so exciting, James asked. How many do you think have arrived? At least 50, maybe more, replied James with a warm smile. James checked his watch with a smile. Just 8 hours to go until Ramirez's deadline. Oh, he'll be making his move soon, I'm sure. We really can't risk changing our minds about his offer, can we? What's the plan? We give him what he wants, of course. We just need to make him think we're feeling the pressure a bit. James turned to Linda with a warm smile. Give your daughter a quick call, would you? Just let her know that you're thinking about taking the deal, sweetheart. Just make it sound convincing, okay? Linda's eyes lit up with understanding. Let them think they're winning, my friend. James smiled warmly. And don't forget about your mum, too. Cooper, you know your son better than anyone. I think you might be ready to listen to reason, my friend. I really think we need Ramirez to believe that his strategy is working. Agent Torres gave a little wink. It's a bit of a risky move, don't you think? If they think we're about to give up, they might rush their timeline. Oh, absolutely, James replied with a smile. I think we can count on the more confident they get, the sloppier they'll be. And we really need them to be a bit sloppy. The radio crackled again, and we all smiled at each other. Guess what? More vehicles are arriving at the mill. Oh, look, it's more of those lovely black SUVs. James went to the window and looked at the lights in the distance through his binoculars. Oh, it looks like Ramirez is gathering his forces. Oh, he wants. Sarah asked James to be there when we break things, bless her. She wants him to see that he can't resist, sweetie. He's built his whole operation on fear, and he wants people to believe that resistance is futile. The lovely Doc Wilson popped by with some more surveillance photos. Oh, there's movement at every truck stop within 50 miles. The lovely Steel Vipers are doing a great job of clearing them out and shutting them down. Oh, it's so sad. They're cutting off our last possible allies. Cooper replied, No, thank you. James kindly corrected him, creating witnesses. They're threatening everyone. Every business they've had to shut down. They're all potential, you know. As the night went on, the atmosphere got more and more tense as Ramirez's deadline drew closer. The group of bikes around Crosswind Junction made their lights shine brighter, creating a lovely ring of light in the darkness. Meanwhile, back inside, James and his team were busy getting everything ready. Everyone knew what they had to do and was excited for what was to come. Linda asked softly, Do you really think this will work? James replied with a reassuring smile, It has to, don't worry. But what if it doesn't work out? Linda was really determined to get to the bottom of it. James smiled gently in response. If that doesn't work, we'll just have to try something else, okay? Linda nodded, her eyes shining with understanding. I know. James smiled gently and asked, Do you really think this will work? Linda nodded again, her eyes shining with hope. I do, I really do. James smiled warmly. That's great. I really hope we can stop them here, otherwise they'll keep spreading. And there are more communities. And more families. It's so sad to see people living in fear. Sometimes, you have to let the enemy think. Oh dear, it looks like they're winning and about to deliver the killing blow. Let's hope they don't succeed. The radio crackled to life with Big Steve's voice, and I could see lots of vehicles leaving the mill. Oh my, it looks like they're getting ready for something big. Here we go, James said, checking his weapon one last time with a reassuring smile. Hey everyone, just a quick reminder. No matter what happens next, we have to make it look good. Thanks, guys. Oh, poor Ramirez. He really needs to believe that he's watching us break. The sound of engines grew louder as Ramirez's force began to move. The moment we've all been waiting for is finally here. But there's still one thing you need to know. The final confrontation was about to begin, but only one side knew the truth. The stakes are high in the battle that's about to unfold, so let's hope for the best. Just 6 hours before Ramirez's deadline, there was a bit of a hiccup at Crosswind Junction. Thankfully, James had thought ahead and had the emergency lights on. He'd also thoughtfully cast a spell to make the rest stop glow in a lovely, eerie red light. Outside, the circle of motorcycle headlights got tighter and moved closer. James checked his watch and saw that it was time to get going. He was really hoping to catch us off guard. Cooper's radio crackled with some worrying news. It seems that there are steel vipers blocking every access road within 5 miles. Big Steve's voice came through the chatter on the SUV with a reassuring tone. Guess who's coming to visit us from the south? Ramirez. He's coming to oversee things in person, which is great. Inside the diner, James's veterans took their places, ready for action. They'd had lots of practice and knew exactly what to expect. Linda and Sarah had been moved to the reinforced back office along with other civilians who'd been reluctant to leave. James spoke to his team in a reassuring tone. He let them think they were in control, bless them. It's so important to make it look like everything's falling apart. The lovely convoy of black SUVs pulled into the lot. They parked up in a perfect defensive formation. Ramirez stepped out of the central vehicle, looking as dapper as ever in his designer suit. His security team was right behind him, looking professional and ready for anything. "Hello, Mr. Davidson," he called out in a friendly voice as he approached the entrance. "I'm even willing to raise my offer, my friend, given how stubborn you've proven to be." James was delighted to meet him at the door. He came to help out with the nitty-gritty this time. "I like to come by in person when I can to help resolve things." Ramirez smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I respect worthy opponents enough to handle them myself." As Ramirez walked away, more bikes arrived behind him. He led a group of steel vipers through the car park with a smile on his face. Their numbers have now reached over 100. The message was clear. It was time to give up. "You've put up an admirable fight," Ramirez continued with a warm smile. "Oh, that was truly impressive. I'm sure you can see now that there's no point in holding out any longer. I'm really sorry to have to tell you that you're isolated and out of options." As if to really drive the point home, a volley of rocks smashed the last few windows. Glass rained down as the steel vipers cheered, their faces beaming with delight. "I give you credit," Ramirez said with a warm smile, brushing glass from his sleeve. "I'm sure most people would find this difficult." "Oh, it's so stressful, isn't it? But now it's time to be reasonable, my friends. Take the money, my friend, and walk away. Let business happen as it should. I'm really sorry, but I don't think it's going to happen." Ramirez's smile disappeared, and he said, "I'm sorry, but I'm afraid you've left me with no choice. I've tried to be as nice as I can about this," but he gestured to his men to search the place and find anything we can use. The professional cartel soldiers moved in, and it was clear they were armed and ready for action. They began a methodical sweep of the diner while steel vipers poured in behind them, swaggering and destructive. "Oh, you're making a mistake, my friend." James gave a little warning. "Oh, Mr. Davidson, you did make a mistake. You thought you could stand against me, my friend. I've got a good grip on things here. I've got the police on side, and I've got the politicians too. I'm sorry to say that your little resistance is going to end tonight." Brick approached, a big, warm grin on his face, and said, "We're just going to show the old man what happens to people who don't cooperate, that's all." Ramirez said, "First, we'll make sure his friends understand the consequences of their loyalty. Hello, lovely workers. I just wanted to let you all know that James has been so open and honest with us. He told us that he spent weeks gathering all that intelligence. I'm sure you'll agree that I'm nothing if not thorough." Ramirez nodded in agreement, saying that every person has pressure points, and it's just a matter of finding them. The cartel soldiers carried on with their search, moving with the confidence and ease of someone who has done it many times before. The Steel Vipers, our esteemed members, strode through the space with a confident swagger, playfully knocking things over to assert their dominance. "I'm sure you can guess what's going to happen next," Ramirez said in a soft, reassuring voice. "First, we just want to show the troublemakers that we don't tolerate that kind of behavior. And then, in no time at all, we had a new management team in place. Don't worry, James. I'm sure no one will even remember your resistance." "Oh, it's his watch again." There was something in his tone that made Ramirez stop and think. He looked at James more closely, noticing that he wasn't afraid and seemed to be waiting for something. Ramirez suddenly realized that James was planning something. It seemed like some last desperate move, but there was nothing desperate about it. James replied, "I'm just waiting." "Just waiting for what, my friend?" Before James had a chance to answer, Big Steve's voice came through on the radio. It looked like the feds were on their way. Federal vehicles were approaching from all directions, from multiple agencies. Ramirez's eyes narrowed ever so slightly. "You called the authorities, sweetheart. I just wanted to let you know that I own them." "Oh, not all of them," James replied with a smile. "Oh, not the ones coming now, sweetheart." All of a sudden, some really bright spotlights came on from places where they weren't expected. "Oh, please don't shine a light on the whole car park." The circle of bikers was clearly visible now, as were the cartel soldiers inside. "What is this?" Ramirez asked, sounding a little confused. James replied with a smile. "Oh, this is what happens when you target the wrong veteran at the wrong rest stop." As if on cue, the sound of helicopter rotors thundered overhead as federal tactical teams appeared from concealed positions. It was all there in black and white, as clear as day. Every photo Ramirez had taken, every threat he'd made, every bribe he'd offered, it was all there in black and white. It was all documented, so there was no doubt about it. It was a perfect case against the whole organization. "Oh my goodness, you've been playing us," Ramirez said, realization dawning. The gradual breakdown, the appearance, the resistance. "I can see it all now. It's all there, my friend." "Oh, Isel, you had to draw James out, didn't you?" "I know you did. You had to make him commit his forces and reveal his connections, didn't you? But I'm sure you realized that your operation couldn't take down without proof, right?" "Oh, this is interesting." As soon as the federal agents arrived on the scene, the Steel Vipers began to disperse. The cartel soldiers reached for their weapons but found themselves surrounded. Poor things. Ramirez's security team looked to. James said gently, "It's over, Ramirez. I'm really sorry to have to tell you that your entire network is being rolled up as we speak. Every corrupt police officer, every official who has been bribed, and every distribution point. It's so sad. All those years of building up the empire, and it's all gone in a single night." Ramirez's calm exterior finally gave way to emotion. "Oh, kill them," he said, his voice rising in a scream. "Oh, just kill them all, please." Chaos broke out as cartel soldiers and Steel Vipers tried to fight back, but James's veterans were ready for them. The rest stop became a bit of a battlefield as federal agents and trained fighters engaged the criminals from prepared positions. The soldiers and Steel Vipers tried to fight back, but James's veterans were ready for them, bless them. The rest stop quickly turned into a battlefield as federal agents and trained fighters bravely engaged the criminals from prepared positions. James was there, ready to lend a hand. He asked kindly, "Do you understand now?" James asked as he expertly and gently subdued Ramirez. "Why this rest stop? Oh, why these people? I'm so sorry to have to tell you this, but every person you threatened, every family you targeted, my friend, they were all part of one big, happy community. A community of veterans, law enforcement, and ordinary citizens who'd finally had enough and decided to take a stand. The battle was short but really quite intense. When it was all over, dozens of Steel Vipers and cartel soldiers were in custody. Oh, and Ramirez was there too. His expensive suit was now dirty and torn, bless him. I couldn't believe my eyes as his empire came tumbling down. Oh, it was just the saddest thing," he said quietly. "I thought I'd covered all the bases, but there was one thing I hadn't considered." James said, "As federal agents led Ramirez away, you forgot that some things are worth fighting for. Some communities are just too strong to be broken, no matter how much pressure you apply." As the sun began to rise, the last arrests were made. Linda and Sarah popped their heads out of the back office to see what had happened. The rest stop was a bit battered, but it was still standing strong, just like its defenders. It was such a heartwarming sight to behold. Cooper looked on with a heavy heart as federal agents processed prisoners. He couldn't help but wonder, was it worth it? All that risk, all that damage. I said with a warm smile. James looked around at the amazing community that had stood together. It was so lovely to see everyone come together like that. Together, they had put everything on the line to take down a criminal empire. He asked them in a quiet, kind voice if they would kindly ask every town and truck stop that won't have to live under Ramirez's shadow now. Some fights choose you, my friend. The only question is whether you're willing to stand and face them. The lovely, long shadows of the rising sun were cast across the parking lot. In the car park, The lovely federal agents were working really hard to dismantle the last bits of Ramirez's operation. But in Crosswind Junction rest stop, a new day was just beginning. It was a lovely, peaceful day, free from any threats or fear. And it was all thanks to two lovely bikers who had targeted the wrong veteran at the wrong rest stop. As the sun climbed higher over Crosswind Junction, the federal agents were pleased to report that the last of the arrested Steel Vipers and cartel soldiers had been processed, and the evidence team was working methodically through the scene, documenting everything. James sat at his usual spot at the counter, watching the operation unfold while DEA agent Torres gave him a debriefing. The final count was impressive, she said, smiling as she reviewed her notes. Oh my, that makes it 87. And we've got Steel Vipers members, 23 cartel soldiers and Ramirez himself. And we're rolling up his entire network, which is fantastic news. It's so inspiring to see all these corrupt officials falling like dominoes. James gave a little nod and took a sip of his coffee. How far does it reach, do you think? He asked with a hopeful tone. 3 state police commanders, a dozen local cops, 2 judges, even a state senator. Ramirez was telling the truth when he said he had influence. But the evidence we gathered was truly incredible. We made sure to document every single threat, every bribe, and every illegal order. I just wanted to say a big thank you to your team. They did such a great job. Linda approached with a steaming cup of coffee, carefully stepping around the federal photographers. So it's really over, then? James was happy to confirm, but there's still a little more work to do. Oh, these organizations don't just disappear overnight, bless them. Cooper came in looking a little tired but happy. Guess what? He just got word from Oklahoma City. They found Ramirez's main storage facility. Can you believe it? They found enough drugs to supply 3 states for a whole month. Can you believe it? The street value is over $50 million. And that's just one location. And the best part is, we're finding more every hour. This operation didn't just catch the criminals, it also helped to expose an entire infrastructure of corruption and trafficking. Sarah, who had been helping to document the damage to the diner, joined them. I still can't quite believe it all. All those threats, all that pressure, it was pretty scary, right? But you had a feeling it would end like this, didn't you? You always knew how it would end, James. He sat down and took a little sip of coffee. I had a feeling it might end this way if everything went right. Ramirez had a few tricks up his sleeve, including intimidation, isolation, and escalation. Once we understood that we could use it against him by letting him think it was working every time he thought he was breaking us, Cooper realized we were actually getting more evidence, but it only worked because everyone played their part perfectly. They were all so great. James finished, and it was so important to make sure the fear looked real, and the pressure seemed to be working. Big Steve's voice crackled over the radio, and they could see more feds were coming. It seemed like the FBI brass were keen to see this operation for themselves. Through the windows, they could see a convoy of official vehicles approaching. They were black SUVs, but very different from Ramirez's. They carried the full weight of federal authority, and they were ready to use it if they had to. Just a heads up, Agent Torres, they said kindly. They'll probably want statements from everyone, so just make sure you're ready to go. This case is going to be huge, and we're going to make history together. And then we saw vans starting to appear at the edges of the scene. It was so lovely to see how the story was getting out, and how a small rest stop had become the focal point for bringing down a major criminal enterprise. Oh, what on earth is going to happen to the Steel Vipers now? Linda asked, her eyes following the line of gang members being led to transport vehicles. I think most of them will make deals, Agent Torres explained kindly. I really hope they'll give evidence against Ramirez's organization in exchange for lighter sentences. Once the gangs had finished, one of them said, I don't think anyone will want to wear those colors after this. James got up and went over to the window. The lovely folks from the federal team were busy documenting the elaborate surveillance network that Carl Martinez had helped install. Every camera and sensor had played its part in building the case, and they all did a great job. You know what really got to them, he said in a soft, gentle voice. It wasn't the fancy equipment or the federal backup that did it. It was the community, every person who stood their ground and refused to be intimidated. They were so inspiring. Oh, bless his heart, Ramirez just couldn't understand it. The lovely Doc Wilson came in. She was carrying a stack of files and had just finished putting together all the medical reports and evidence of every threat and act of intimidation. She even had footage of the Steel Vipers chatting about their connection to Ramirez's operation. Perfect, Agent Torres said with a warm smile. Rico, Accepting these files will help us make sure the charges stick. It's so important to have all the right documentation, don't you think? The lovely FBI officials started arriving, suits and badges moving purposefully through the scene. They gathered around James, keen to understand how a former Force Recon Marine had managed to put together such an impressive sting. The best part was Cooper telling them about using their own surveillance against them. We made sure to capture every single person who made a threat on camera, doing exactly that. It was so clever of Cooper to use their own surveillance against them. Every move they made to prove their power became evidence of their crimes. James kindly let us know that Sarah was still processing everything. She asked, "But what about all the people they threatened? All the families they targeted?" she asked gently. Agent Torres was so reassuring. She said that the protective details will stay in place until we're absolutely sure there's no longer any threat, which is great news. And the great news is that anyone who helped with the operation can get witness protection if they want it. James just gave a little shake of his head. He said they don't need to worry about that. "Oh, poor Ramirez's organization is finished now. We've got all the evidence we need, and I'm sure his people will make deals to save themselves, so there won't be anything left to threaten anyone." As the story spread, more and more vehicles arrived. Reporters set up their cameras to document the fall of a major criminal enterprise. Local folks started gathering at the edge of the scene, watching with interest. The federal agents worked really hard to dismantle the awful organization that had terrorized their community. Oh, you should have seen Ramirez's face when he realized it was all a trap. Oh, it was such a shame to see all that confidence and arrogance just disappear in an instant. James couldn't help but smile as he observed that it's always their Achilles heel. They get so used to being in control that they just can't help themselves. Just picture it for a moment. Oh, it's so frustrating when someone outmaneuvers you. Linda looked around at the damage to her diner. Oh dear, I'm afraid the repairs will take weeks. I'm sure the insurance company will try to help, but it probably won't cover all of it. Don't worry about that, Agent Torres interjected kindly. Don't worry, there are federal programs for businesses damaged during major operations like this. On top of that, Ramirez's organization will be paying compensation through asset forfeiture. As the day went on, more officials came by to check in. As the day went on, more evidence was processed. We were lucky enough to get some more details of the operation. What started as a small protest against local intimidation has now become one of the biggest organized crime busts in recent history. You know what amazes me, Sarah? He watched the proceedings with a big, warm smile on his face, seeing how everyone came together. He thanked all the people who helped and took risks, realizing that everyone had a part to play in this amazing achievement. James nodded in agreement, saying that's what Ramirez never understood. He thought he could isolate us and break us down, but we proved him wrong. Real communities don't break, and they get stronger. The lovely under-pressure Agent Phillips approached with some new information he'd just received from the task force. Guess what? They're finding Ramirez's connections in places we never expected, including shipping companies, trucking firms, and even customs officials. His network was so much bigger than anyone could have imagined. He spent years building it. James replied with a smile. He was so patient and methodical. He took over one route at a time, bit by bit. It's just so sad. One official at a time used legitimate businesses to hide a legal operation. They watched as another group of officials was brought in for questioning. It was such a tangled web of evidence. James' team had just received the latest updates from the FBI. I'm happy to say that they've already seized over $300 million in assets, including bank accounts, properties, and businesses. Oh, Ramirez had some pretty legit holdings all over the country. It's a classic cartel strategy, bless him. James was really helpful in explaining how it can be so tricky to trace the money and prove the connections when you have a legitimate empire to hide the criminal one. Big Steve's voice came over the radio. He said that more federal transport vehicles were on the way. Oh my, it looked like they'd found another group of dirty cops. Linda couldn't help but shake her head in amazement. Oh my, how could no one have noticed before all this corruption and all these connections? James said that they just couldn't prove anything, bless him. Ramirez was really careful and kept everything nice and compartmentalized. Each piece seemed perfectly legitimate on its own, but then he got a bit greedy and tried to expand too fast and too aggressively. Torres added that he'd made a few mistakes along the way, like thinking he could intimidate a rest stop full of veterans. Sarah looked on with growing concern as more and more officials were led away in handcuffs to waiting vehicles. I really hope it changes something. I really hope it makes a difference. James replied with a warm smile. Absolutely. It's so great to see that everyone who was afraid to speak up before is now coming forward. It's so wonderful to see every business that felt trapped is now breaking free. It's so great to see that the fear is breaking down. Cooper's radio crackled with the latest updates. I'm happy to say that more arrests were being made across 3 states. Each person caught in the web was ready to throw in the towel. Others were trying to save themselves, bless their hearts. The domino effect was spreading far beyond Crosswind Junction, and it was spreading fast. You know what the real victory is, James said, watching the scene unfold with a warm smile. It's not just about taking down Ramirez, you know. It's about showing other communities that they don't have to live in fear, that they can live freely and safely. You can fight back. The lovely Doc Wilson came in with some new surveillance footage. I really think you'll find this fascinating. The cameras also captured some Steel Vipers members at other rest stops who were trying to destroy evidence. It's so sad. It was too late, even though we'd already taken note of everything they were up to. Oh my, they're running scared. Torres noticed some interesting things happening in the criminal underground. Guess what? The invincible cartel got taken down by a rest stop. Linda kindly poured fresh coffee for the gathered group. I wonder if they'll try to rebuild and start over somewhere else? James gave a little shake of his head. Oh goodness, no. Not here, not anywhere near here. Oh, that's all cleared up. It's so sad, but now everyone knows that they're not invincible. Oh, don't you worry, they can be beaten. Outside, my friend. More news crews were. As the story unfolded, it became clear that this wasn't just about taking down a cartel. It was about a community coming together, sticking together, and turning the tables on those who tried to terrorize them. Cooper checked his phone and shared some more news. The state police had found 3 more storage facilities filled with drugs, weapons, and evidence of bribes and threats. They're calling it a treasure trove of evidence, and it's going to take years to fully unravel it all. But it'll all be worth it in the end. Torres added that every piece of evidence leads to new connections and new crimes, which is really exciting. Ramirez's empire was bigger than anyone suspected, and Sarah watched with admiration as more federal agents arrived, bringing more evidence. More arrests were made, and it's hard to believe it all started with 2 bikers thinking they could push around a veteran. It's so inspiring to see how the community came together to stand up for themselves. Oh, that's usually how these things go, isn't it, James? We all know how it goes. Someone gets a bit too confident, thinks they're untouchable, forgets that real strength isn't about having the most muscle or the most money. It's about having something worth fighting for, he replied with a warm smile. The afternoon sun was casting lovely long shadows across the car park. The federal teams kept up their good work, taking care to dismantle what Ramirez had spent decades building. With each arrest, each piece of evidence, and each seized asset, it seemed like another nail was being hammered into the coffin of his criminal empire. The best part is that Cooper said, watching another transport vehicle pull away, every community along their route is going to sleep better tonight. It's so wonderful to see that every family they threatened and every business they tried to control is now free. James stood at his usual spot by the window, watching the scene unfold with a warm smile on his face. The rest stop was a little worn out, but still going strong. The defenders were tired but proud. They did so much more than just resist intimidation. They had done something really special. They had struck a blow against organized crime that would have a big impact for years to come. Sometimes he said quietly, with a kind smile, that the worst mistake a criminal can make is underestimating their target. Ramirez thought he was up against one old veteran at one small rest stop, but he ended up meeting a community that was so strong and refused to break. In a brilliant move, they turned his own tactics against him. Now we rebuild, Linda said with a smile. We're going to make this place stronger than ever before. And we remember that every time someone tries to rule through fear, there will always be people willing to stand up against them. There will always be communities ready to fight back, and we're so grateful to be a part of this one. As the sun began to set on Crosswind Junction rest stop, it was clear that there was still a lot of work to be done. The lovely folks at Crosswind Junction were just starting to share their incredible story of how they'd taken down a criminal empire. It was so inspiring to see others standing up against intimidation and corruption. James watched as the day's activities continued, feeling a wonderful sense of satisfaction at what they had accomplished here. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places. It was here at a rest stop that 2 bikers made the mistake of targeting the wrong veteran. Just 3 days after Ramirez's arrest, Crosswind Junction rest stop was still going strong. The lovely folks from the federal agency had set up a temporary command center in the park lot, coordinating raids across 3 states. James watched from his usual spot as another group of officials, who had made a mistake like he had, were brought in for processing. Cooper was pleased to see that this was the 3rd police chief to turn up today, joining him at the counter. Oh my, Ramirez's network was more extensive than anyone had imagined. Not just police agent Torres added, cheerfully spreading out new files we'd uncovered. It was so interesting to see how many different people were involved. There were connections to shipping companies, trucking firms, and even customs officials. James took a closer look at the documents. He'd spent years building this up, taking it one route at a time and one official at a time. He'd put his heart and soul into it. He took a moment to think, shaking his head. Oh, it all came crashing down because he just couldn't leave one rest stop alone. Some people just can't handle being told no. Bless them. Sarah cheerfully added, I've got some fresh coffee for you. The radio crackled with, Guess what? Guess what? Big Steve said on the radio that there are media trucks coming from the north. Guess what? It looks like all the major networks are here. Through the windows, they could see a convoy of news vans, which was really exciting. The story had really taken off overnight. It was thanks to the brave folks at a small-town rest stop that we now know about a huge criminal operation. Everyone's really keen to know the details. They're calling it Operation Crosswind, which is pretty cool, don't you think? Agent Torres was really excited to tell us that the Justice Department is making it a showcase case. It's so lovely to see how excited everyone is about this. Every prosecutor wants a piece of it. Then Linda came out of her office. Guess what? She'd been meeting with contractors. Guess what? She'd just got the repair estimates. Insurance companies are actually. It's so lovely to see them being helpful for once. It's so lovely to see them eager to be on the right side of this story. Cooper noticed that everyone wants to help the recovery of the rest stop that took down a cartel. Guess what? Even more federal vehicles arrived. Guess who was there? Senior officials from Washington. The case had really taken on a life of its own. It was so inspiring to see how each arrest led to new revelations, new connections, and new evidence of corruption being uncovered. The lovely FBI Task Force agent Torres let me know that they've already seized over $200 million in assets. Guess what? They've found bank accounts, properties, and businesses. Oh, and Ramirez had some pretty legit holdings all over the country. James gave a little nod. It's a classic strategy for cartels. Build a legitimate empire to hide the criminal one. Doc Wilson popped his head in with another stack of files and said, You really need to see this. He said, spreading out the surveillance photos with a warm smile. Do you remember those steel Vipers we saw at other truck stops? Guess what? It turns out they were setting up distribution points all along the major highways. It's a whole network. It's the perfect setup for moving product across state lines. Cooper had an aha moment. He realized that some folks in power might be using truck stops as hubs and legitimate businesses as cover. Sarah, who had been listening intently, asked, But how did no one notice before now? James was happy to explain. They just couldn't prove it. Ramirez was really very careful to keep everything separate. Each piece looked perfectly legitimate on its own, but he got a little greedy and tried to expand too fast and too aggressively. Agent Torres added that he made a few mistakes along the way, and that the media presence grew as more reporters arrived. The parking lot was becoming quite the scene, with lots of cameras, microphones, and satellite trucks, as everyone was eager to share the story of how a former Marine and a small community had brought. They're even down a criminal empire and are requesting interviews. Linda said, holding up a stack of messages from every major network and newspaper, as well as magazines. James is waiting until we're sure we've got all the major players before he does any interviews, which I think is a great idea. Oh, and some of Ramirez's people are still out there. The radio crackled again, and they saw that more federal transport vehicles were incoming. Oh my, it looks like they've found another group of police officers who have been involved in some wrongdoing. Through the windows, they watched as it was such a relief to see that more officials were arrested, including former officers, politicians, and business leaders. They seemed like nice folks until Ramirez's network started unraveling. Cooper was blown away by the sheer number of everyday folks who helped make this happen. Thankfully, some kind truckers reported suspicious activity, and some observant mechanics noted unusual modifications to vehicles. This is what helped bring Ramirez down in the end. James said that he could buy officials, but that he couldn't buy the whole community's silence. Even though he was corrupt, he couldn't buy the whole community's silence. Agent Torres gave a little nod. The evidence is really quite overwhelming, she said with a warm smile. We've got lots of evidence, including surveillance footage, financial records, and witness statements. We've got enough to put him away for several lifetimes, which I think is just what he deserves. A bit of a commotion outside caught their attention. The lovely federal agents were kindly escorting Brick and several other Steel Viper leaders from the transport vehicles. They'd been brought back for a little more chat, just to help us get to the bottom of things. Oh dear, it seems that everyone is turning on each other after new evidence came to light. Cooper's been keeping a close eye on all the gang members and corrupt officials, and it looks like they're all trying to make deals. Oh, that's just how these cases usually work. Agent Torres was really helpful in explaining that the first person to talk gets the best deal. It seems like everyone is keen to chat. The contractors have started making initial repairs inside the diner, which is great to see. The place is still a bit of a mess, bless it, but there's definitely progress. It's so lovely to see each fixed window. The repaired fixture was a wonderful symbol of recovery. There's something else you should see, Doc Wilson called out, beckoning James over to his laptop with a warm smile. He was looking over the financial records. Oh, and Ramirez wasn't just using the truck stops for drug distribution. He was laundering money through them too. James took a moment to study the screen. It was quite the intricate operation. They used legitimate businesses to clean dirty money, then reinvested it in more legitimate holdings. He'd worked so hard to build his empire brick by brick, one layer at a time, and now it's all coming down. Agent Torres said with a big, warm smile on his face. We're so sorry to have to tell you this, but we're going to have to take everything. Every business, every account, every connection. We're taking it all. As the day went on, more evidence came to light, more arrests were made, and more details of Ramirez's operation emerged. What started as a small protest against intimidation has led to the discovery of a criminal network that spans multiple states and industries. Sarah watched the never-ending stream of federal activity with a big, beaming smile on her face. She was absolutely amazed by the nonstop federal activity. It's so hard to believe that it all started with two bikers who thought they could push around a veteran. Oh, that's usually how these things start, James replied with a warm smile. He added that people often think they can bully their way to power, never realizing they're picking a fight they can't win. Which is a shame, because it's never a good idea to be unkind to others. Just 1 week after Ramirez's arrest, the federal presence at Crosswind Junction had grown so much. It had gone from a tactical operation to a full-scale investigation. In just a week, some shocking things came to light. Even veteran investigators were taken aback by the scale of criminality they uncovered. James was busy going over reports with Agent Torres, while Cooper was in touch with the FBI teams. Oh my, the latest numbers are absolutely staggering. With a smile, Torres said, I'm updating my files. It's been a busy week. We've made over 300 arrests across 5 states, seized nearly $500 million in assets, and busted 42 corrupt officials, including 3 judges and a state senator. And there's still more to be found. James looked at some photos from the surveillance cameras. He could see more Steel Vipers being arrested in different places. It's so great to see them running out of places to hide, Cooper added with a smile. And every time we arrest one, they give up 2 more. It's like a house of cards, and it's all coming down. The radio crackled to life with Big Steve's cheerful voice, and he got another. Hello, I just wanted to let you know that a convoy is approaching. It looks like the lovely folks at the DEA are bringing in more of their seized evidence. Through the windows, they watched with interest as trucks loaded with confiscated drugs and money rolled into the makeshift federal compound. What started as a small resistance against some local thugs has grown into one of the biggest organized crime busts in recent history. You know what amazes me, Sarah said, bringing fresh coffee. Just think of all the lives this has touched. It's so inspiring to see how many people this has impacted. All those poor people who were bullied and intimidated, and all those businesses that were extorted. And now they're all coming forward, which is so wonderful to see. We've even got witnesses from truck stops across 3 states. The wonderful Torres has confirmed that everyone Ramirez has ever threatened and everyone the Steel Vipers ever intimidated are sharing their stories. Linda approached with a stack of newspapers in her hand. Guess what? We're in all of them. It's so inspiring to see how a small-town rest stop has brought down a criminal empire. A veteran has done something amazing. They've exposed massive corruption. They're calling it the biggest organized crime bust since Al Capone, which is pretty impressive. I think the media is missing the point a little bit, though. James said that it seems like a lot of people want to make it about one person and one stand, but he thinks it was always about something much bigger than that. Cooper was happy to agree that it was about the community. And we mustn't forget all those wonderful people who helped in any way they could. And we can't forget all the wonderful people who came forward as witnesses. Doc Wilson, I've just heard some new reports from the FBI task force that I think you'll be interested in hearing. Guess what? They've traced Ramirez's connections all the way to Mexico. It seems that the cartel leaders are trying to distance themselves, which is totally understandable. James said that nobody wants to be associated with such a massive failure, which I can understand. Oh, and poor Ramirez didn't just lose his operation, but he also exposed some weaknesses in the whole cartel structure. As the story continued to grow, media trucks arrived and reporters were eager to chat with those involved in the story of how a small rest stop had brought down a criminal empire. Oh my, the gangsters were feeling the heat, Torres said, pulling up new files on her laptop. Do you remember those threatening photos Ramirez's people took? We're using them to identify more gang members, so we can keep everyone safe. Every time they tried to scare us, it just made us more determined. More good news. Evidence against them was revealed on the radio, with more arrests and progress being made. I'm happy to say that the state police have just picked up the last major Steel Viper chapter in Texas. James went to the window and watched as more suspects were brought in. They never really understood what they were up against. They thought they could break people down individually, but they never realized they were uniting an entire community against them. How many more are out there, do you think? How many of Ramirez's people are still free, do you think? Not many, I'm afraid, Torres replied. Those that are left can't really trust anyone, bless them. It's so sad. Every former ally is now a potential informant. It's so sad, their world's gotten very small very fast. A commotion outside caught their attention. Guess what? Federal agents were escorting a group of former police officers. Oh my, they're all in handcuffs. All former members of Ramirez's, it seems. The protection network is the last remaining part of the Highway Patrol unit that has been affected by corruption. Cooper was happy to report that they were helping to monitor drug shipments and block investigations. They were also covering up years of suspicious activity reports that were quietly buried. The lovely Torres also mentioned that they were going to reopen all of them inside the diner. I'm happy to say that the repairs are going really well. Thankfully, the insurance money came through, and it was supplemented by federal funds for. We're so sorry to say that some businesses were damaged during the major operations. It was so inspiring to see each fixed window and each repaired fixture as a symbol of recovery. Guess what? I've got some more intel. Doc Wilson called out, beckoning James over to his computer with a warm smile. Do you remember those shipping companies we thought might have been involved? Guess what? We've just found their real books. Guess what? They were moving more than drugs, weapons, stolen goods, and even people. James took a moment to study the data. Ramirez built a complete shadow, bless him. The transportation network used some totally legit businesses as a front for some pretty corrupt officials. It was a perfect system. Torres quickly corrected herself, saying that it was now evidence of every connection and every transaction. All of this is really helping us build the case. As the day went on, more arrests were made, more evidence was processed, and more details of the operation emerged. The ripple effects were spreading far and wide, even beyond Crosswind. It was a huge deal, even beyond Ramirez's own operation. You know what's really satisfying, Cooper said, watching another group of suspects being processed. It's so inspiring to see all these tough guys realize how completely they lost all that power and influence. It's a real eye-opener for them. Pride James replied with a warm smile. It's always their Achilles heel, bless them. They get so used to being untouchable that they forget that no one really is as invincible as they seem. It's an easy mistake to make. The Federal Command Center was still full of life and activity. Guess what? More raids are being planned, and more warrants are being executed. The investigation that started at Crosswind Junction has now spread to multiple states and multiple agencies. Linda approached with more news clippings, eager to share the latest updates. It was so heartening to see other truck stops speaking out and sharing their experiences of intimidation and being forced to cooperate with Ramirez's operation. That's the real victory, James said with a warm smile. It's not just about taking down one criminal enterprise, but showing people they don't have to live in fear. And that's a wonderful thing. As the sun set on another day at Crosswind Junction rest stop, it was clear that the legacy of what had happened there would live on. It's so inspiring to see how a small community has stood up against intimidation and won. It just goes to show that even the most powerful criminal organizations can be brought down. It's so inspiring to see how much we can achieve when we come together and stand up against something we don't like. Sometimes the biggest changes start in the smallest places, which is really quite wonderful. It was like a rest stop where two bikers made a bit of a mistake and targeted the wrong veteran. But a community decided to take a stand against fear itself, and it was so inspiring to see. And that's something to celebrate. We've got 2 more amazing stories right here on your screen. If this one is as good as we think it'll be, you'll definitely want to check out these other 2. All you have to do is click and check them out.